Let's cross over to Washington live now to Dr. Alina Polyakova, president of the Center for European Policy Analysis. You're also an expert in Russian foreign policy. Of course, this is a developing, breaking news story, but given what we've seen today with those extensive attacks across Ukraine, can you just comment on what we're hearing when it comes to potentially what has happened in Poland?
Well, of course, we don't know the facts on the ground yet, as you said, but certainly this was not unexpected. Russian missile attacks have not been precise. They've been quite imprecise, in fact, in hitting their targets for the last months of this war. And they have just recently launched the most massive missile attack on Ukraine in the last 9 months. It was really a matter of time until one of these missiles was going to cross over into Poland or another neighboring state that is part of NATO and part of the EU. I mean, certainly, if this is what has happened, it's deeply, deeply concerning and could lead to a quite profound escalation in the war.
If it is, if we get confirmation, we're of course, and I'm caveating this all the time, that this hasn't been confirmed as such, but there's an awful lot of activity across Polish media at the moment, and we're waiting to hear what the Polish government is going to say. Mateusz Morawiecki calling that urgent meeting of the National Security Council. But when it comes with NATO, we know about its Article 5, defence of one is defence of all. If this is a mistake, does that still apply?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with what the Russian side will now say and do. Of course, if we hear an official statement from the Kremlin saying that this was an accidental hit, if that is what it is, then that will change things. I think that will change how the current meeting in the National Security Council session in Poland goes. I think very much throughout this war, Putin and the Kremlin has kept maneuverability. So it's really up to them to make a statement as soon as possible to avoid any kind of potential misperceptions that this was an intentional attack. And if it was an intentional attack, I mean, certainly that is very, very concerning. If it was an accident, we need to hear that as soon as possible from official Kremlin sources.
Is that something that you genuinely would expect, though? Because let's face it, you've got Sergei Lavrov, Russia's representative at the G20, speaking today while these attacks from Russia across Ukraine, these extensive attacks are taking place. It doesn't feel like, whatever is, once we get confirmation or not, whatever is happening in Poland, does it feel like the Russians would actually be willing to be so open about it?
I do think the chances of that are slim. Very much throughout the war and even before February 24th, Russian officials have lied consistently about their intentions against Ukraine, about their intention against Ukraine's allies. So I would be surprised to see them make that clear. On the other hand, it would be the prudent move. I don't think there's a real interest for Mr. Putin or his close advisors, including Mr. Lavrov, in starting a potential direct confrontation with NATO. To be clear, a potential confrontation with NATO would be the potential beginning of a global war and a global crisis beyond what we have in Ukraine. And Russia would lose that war, hands down. The Kremlin is aware of that. They are losing a huge amount of weapons and soldiers in this conflict with Ukraine. They want to contain it. They can contain it if they take the right initiative here and make it very clear that if this is a confirmed missile attack, that it was not intentional. Because, as I said, we are looking at an incredibly dangerous situation at this particular moment if there was a missile attack and the Kremlin stays silent on it.
Well, Dr. Polyakova, just to re-stress, the Pentagon saying that it cannot confirm reports that Russian missiles have crossed into Poland near the Ukraine border. We're still awaiting any kind of official confirmation. But I just wonder, when you have Russia at the table at the G20, what kind of message does it send to the Kremlin? Is it not just a green light to behave in this manner?
Absolutely. I think the international community has been far too slow to send a very clear signal to the Kremlin, to Mr. Putin, that his war of aggression against Ukraine does not any longer give him any access to the broader international conversations and the debates that we're seeing today at the G20. I think President Zelensky was correct to continuously to refer to the G20 meeting as the G19. Russia has no place at the table of civilized nations based on what we're seeing unfold in Ukraine, the kind of brutality we're seeing unfold in Ukraine. It's no question in my mind that the timing of this attack to coincide with the G20 meeting, to coincide with President Zelensky's virtual address, where he urged the G20 members to send a clear signal to Russia that this missile attack was strategically designed to take place during that meeting and to follow President Zelensky's speech. And this should, like so many other things the Russian Federation has done, send a very, very clear signal. The Kremlin is not interested in de-escalating. They're not interested at this time in negotiating. They're interested in wiping Ukraine off the face of the earth. And they're interested in undermining the international alliances that Ukraine has to support its ability to defend itself. This was no accident that this missile attack on Ukraine took place during the G20. Of course, remains to be seen whether the reports of potential missiles hitting Poland was accidental or not. And again, the Kremlin should, if this was accident, and it is confirmed to be a missile attack in the future, they should deny it. They should clearly state that that's what it was.
Dr. Polyakova, and again, I just want to remind everybody that the Pentagon is saying that they understand that the press are reporting on this. We have no information at this time to corroborate those reports, but they stress that they are taking them seriously and looking into them. So this idea, this notion that, and we know that Polish press are very much reporting that a Russian missile has fallen within the Poland borders, but we haven't got confirmation as such of that. But the Polish Prime Minister is convening this special meeting. But I just wonder, while we have the G20 ongoing at this moment in time, have you, the relationship between, say, China and Russia or India and Russia, can you just comment on how that is potentially changing, not least because of the ongoing brutality of the war in Ukraine, but just simply given today's missile attacks, that brutal attack across so many different parts, cities of Ukraine?
You know, it's very clear to me that at the beginning of the war on February 24th, Mr. Putin and his advisors thought they were going to have a quick war, a 3-day so-called special military operation, which is, of course, the Russian propaganda language for the war against Ukraine. And now that we are looking at 9 months and many lives lost, in addition to Russia increasingly looking like it might lose this war, its alliances and its support is starting to fracture. You know, just recently we heard President Xi of China say that he had some concerns about the relationship with Russia. Mr. Putin alluded to this in a speech that he made, which was very, very unusual to hear Mr. Putin acknowledge that his counterpart, President Xi, had concerns about the relationship. You know, we're now starting to see that the so-called alliance friendship of no limits, which Russia and China signed shortly before Putin launched the war against Ukraine, that this so-called limitless friendship does have limits. There's some serious concerns both from India and China about the nuclear threats that Mr. Putin and officials in the Kremlin, as well as the Russian media, have been making against Ukraine. If there is a desire and a serious discussion happening within the Kremlin about tactical nuclear weapons use in Ukraine, that would, to my mind, I think, fracture whatever support the Kremlin currently has. And that support is already increasingly fragile because at the end of the day, you know, China has probably no interest in aligning itself with a country that is not competitive economically and that is not going to help China have the kind of global economic and political reach that it wants. Any country that now supports Russia is de facto isolating itself from the global community and from prosperity in the global economy. And I don't think any country like India or China want to be associated with Russia if this war continues in this direction. I think it'll be very smart for leaders and officials in both countries to continue to put some political pressure on Mr. Putin to bring this war to an end. It's not the Ukrainians who started this war. We should not be pressuring Ukraine to the settlement table. It's the Russian side that started this war, and it's up to Mr. Putin to end it.
Dr. Alina Polyakova, Russian foreign policy expert, joining us from the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you very much for taking the time to just talk us through that breaking news that we are getting coming in from the top of the hour.